I want to pause here briefly and give you another word of encouragement. I don't know how many of you have sewn Y seams before. If you've done it, it may or may not be your favorite. They're not as hard as we think they are. And I just would like to encourage you to keep an open mind and try this and find out that it's not very difficult. One of the things that a Y seam does for this particular project is it allows you to have to deal with a little less bias than you would if you were dealing with more triangles. And so I think it makes the project come together better. It keeps your background fabric looking cleaner and more beautiful, especially if you're using a busy print or something like that. If you wanted to, you would have the option of having your corner blocks or your background blocks, you could sew another star or another pattern into them. So knowing how to sew a Y seam is a really good skill to conquer, and I think you're going to find it's not very hard. At this point in the project, there are only 9 more seams left, and then you've got a finished quilt top. And so I just would encourage you to try it, and I think you're going to find out that it's not too bad. In order to sew a Y seam, we are going to sew a triangle into each section of the star. So you're going to sew 3 into each background piece, and then we'll sew the final 2 after we sew it together. In order to do this, I mark one spot. So I take my background fabric, and here at the 90-degree mark on this triangle, I mark another little dot, just like I did with the other things. That little dot is kind of an important thing. And so what you're going to do is you take your star piece, your half of your star, you are going to just fold this over and sew or pin like that. The point of this little mark needs to be at the same point as where your seam ended, which is the case right here. So in order to get them right, all you're going to do is you're going to just pin right there. That's the most important point right now. And then you're going to just carefully line this up along the edge. I like to pin it going up along the side just to make it a little bit easier to keep my fabric in place, especially since I'm dealing with a point up here. I will say one thing, the reason I didn't worry about cutting off my selvage yet is because I figured I can just leave it on and trim it off after I quilt my star together, and so I'll be trimming that at the end. It'll be a little bit easier. So I'm going to start sewing this seam. I'm going to be starting here. I'm going to come down, and when I reach this point, I'm going to try and get my needle right through that black mark that I made. That's where I want to stop my seam. So let's demonstrate and show you how to do it. Alright, so here I am ready to start my seam. Going to begin and sew a careful 1/4 inch seam from the very point, from the very tip. I'm going to just carefully sew all the way down until I get to that little dot. Okay, so now I'm close. I'm going to take the pin out so I can see the dot. And I'm going to carefully sew. If you have to, don't use your presser foot or your foot and use your dial on the side of your machine to get it there, but you want the needle to be going down right through the mark that you made. That's your 1/4 inch seam. So that dot right there should be sitting right on top of the end of this seam from when you sewed your diamonds together. At this point, I'm going to make sure all the pins are out. I'm going to leave my needle in the down position, but I'm going to lift the presser foot. I'm going to lift the background fabric. I want to try and keep it as loose as possible around the needle. And I'm going to fold down the seam that I've already sewn. I'm going to fold it all the way down so it's facing me again. And then I'm going to turn the entire thing to the side. I'm going to carefully work to make sure that that background piece has come around at a 90-degree angle. I want as little puckering in there as possible. So I kind of just reach in and get it so it's pretty flat. Be as careful as possible to not really work it over too much. Then you're going to lower the presser foot again and simply align the two pieces and just sew straight down. I'm going to sew all the way to the end. And your first Y seam is done. Let's see how it looks. So here you see my first Y seam. It worked. Everything looks good. I pressed my fabric towards the background fabric just because that was the easiest thing. If yours is light and this is dark, you might want to press the other direction. This was just what worked for me. So I'm going to continue and do the same thing with the other two portions of the star, remembering again to mark both of the 1/4 inch marks in the 90-degree angle of my background fabrics and sew them in the exact same way that you did the first one. So I've sewn the other half of the star together, and you can see that my background pieces are in and they're looking beautiful. And so when you do that and you've got 3 pieces sewn in for each half, then the next thing will be to sew them together. On the back of this long piece here, I have marked each seam in where I want the seam to be in the same way that I marked every other portion, remembering a 1/4 inch dot here and a 1/4 inch dot here. I'm going to do that to both pieces. I'm going to pin carefully and I'm going to sew end to end, but I'm going to end my seam and start my seam at the 2 dots. That leaves me the 1/4 inch seam to add my remaining 2 background pieces at the end. So once all of your Y seams are done, you're going to mark both sides of both halves of your star, and you're going to sew the star together. So here you see my star is sewn together. I'm so excited. It's always a really, really fun part. At this point, I have sewn this last seam and I did press my seams open again. That'll make adding the final 2 Y seams a little bit easier, and it reduces bulk in the very center point of my star. So with the star sewn together, I'm going to take my last 2 background pieces. I'm going to mark the points. I'm going to do 2 more Y seams. That's all that's left. 2 seams left, and then I'm going to have a finished Lone Star tree skirt or a 48-inch octagon quilt top. So exciting. So I put in the last 2 triangles to finish my background, and here is my finished Lone Star tree skirt quilt top. It's all done. And I have it hanging on my design wall. I wanted to give you a chance to get a good look at it and see what it looks like. So that's it for week 3. We will meet back here next week to talk about quilting. I'm excited to think a little bit during this week about what I'm going to do on mine. I'm also excited to see your tree skirts come together and get to this point. Congratulations to you. You have sewn with bias, you've sewn diamonds together, you've done Y seams, you've done a lot of awesome things that can be tricky and that some quilters are afraid of and try to avoid. So congratulations to you. Give yourself a pat on the back for the skills that you have practiced or mastered or begun working on in this project. We will be back here again next week to talk about quilting. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would leave me some positive feedback on your purchase on my Etsy shop. And with that, I hope you have a great week, and we will see you again next Monday. Happy sewing.